On the evening of July the 26th of 2015, decapitated human remains were found near a pond at house number 10 on Dmitrov Street in the Russian city of St. Petersburg. The following day, authorities established the identity of the deceased, whose severed limbs had been wrapped in a bathroom curtain and left alongside the rest of the body. The victim was 79-year-old Valentina Nikolaevna Ulanova, a nearby resident. When they knocked on Ulanova's apartment, the door was answered by a different woman, identified as Tamara Samsonova, who'd reportedly been living with the victim. Upon searching the home, law enforcement found traces of blood in Ulanova's bathroom and also noticed that the shower curtain had been torn off. Following this discovery, officers moved to arrest Samsonova on suspicion of murder. She was brought to the Frunze District Court of St. Petersburg, where she was ordered to undergo a forensic psychiatric examination. The 68-year-old grandmother was determined to be a threat to both herself and the rest of society and was therefore detained at a specialized institution while the police investigated her. During a raid of the woman's apartment, authorities discovered a series of diary entries detailing upwards of 14 other murders. Samsonova, subsequently dubbed both Granny Ripper and the Baba Yaga, would allegedly dismember her victims and consume their body parts. Among the individuals Samsonova targeted, according to her diary, was a tenant of hers who'd gone missing back in 2003, as well as her late husband, who disappeared without a trace in 2000. The elderly serial killer openly confessed to her crimes, indicating she wanted to be punished to the full extent of the law. Number 7. Peggy ONeill. On July the 14th of 2019, a fire broke out at a house off Chamberlain Drive in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. The blaze caused smoke and heat damage throughout the home, much of which was concentrated in the back bedroom where authorities determined the fire had started. Following further investigation, it was concluded that the fire had been ignited intentionally by the home's occupants, who'd left a lit candle next to a doll clothed in yarn. 28-year-old Ashley Barner was arrested but subsequently implicated her grandmother in the alleged plot as well. Consequently, law enforcement also took 80-year-old Peggy ONeill into custody on the same charges as her granddaughter, which included conspiracy to commit arson and insurance fraud. They were held at the Rutherford County Adult Detention Center on a $100,000 bond each. Number 6. Hester Jordan Burkhalter and Lena Bartula. Tennessee grandmother Hester Jordan Burkhalter was visiting Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom on April the 15th of 2019 when she found herself under the scrutiny of local law enforcement. According to subsequent reports, the 69-year-old was busted bringing CBD oil into the theme park. The hemp-derived substance was discovered after she placed her purse on the security table for inspection, and the oil tested positive for THC, despite the fact that Burkhalter had purchased the CBD legally and even had a doctor's note indicating it was meant to treat her arthritis. She was nevertheless detained by the park's guards before being taken into police custody. As mentioned in documents from the Orange County Sheriff's Office, she initially faced the charge of possession of hashish, a felony in the state of Florida. The situation mirrored that of 71-year-old Lena Bartula, a Texas grandmother who spent multiple nights behind bars under similar circumstances. Back in 2018, Bartula had been caught with CBD oil at the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Also facing a felony drug charge, the woman, an accomplished artist, spent the night in the airport's detention center before being transported to the Tarrant County Jail in Fort Worth for another night. In the end, both Burkhalter and Bartula had their cases dropped. Number 5. Edna Faye Daniels. Shortly before midnight on January the 24th of 2023, a fatal shooting unfolded at 135 Meadow Street in Georgetown County, South Carolina. According to the local sheriff's office, a suspect identified as 30-year-old Ryan O'Neill Woodruff was detained at the scene and subsequently held at the county detention center on murder charges. The victim, 19-year-old Tyquise Demetrius Walker, was found lying face down in the kitchen, having sustained a shotgun wound. He was pronounced dead at the scene. In the days that followed, law enforcement also began zeroing in on Woodruff's grandmother, Edna Faye Daniels, whom they accused of helping to cover up her grandson's crime. The 78-year-old woman had allegedly tried to conceal the incident, which was committed inside her house, from the authorities, and consequently faced charges of obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact to murder. At the time, her grandson was out on bond after getting arrested for an unrelated double murder in May of 2021. He'd allegedly beaten 2 of his relatives to death inside their home with a hammer and crowbar. As of the latest developments, Woodruff's murder charges as well as his grandmother's related charges were all still pending. Number 4. Sarah Griffin. 68-year-old Sarah Griffin visited her jailed grandson, Cody Clements, at the Shelby County Corrections Facility in Memphis, Tennessee in early March of 2018. At one point during the visit, a corrections officer observed the woman hand Clements a bag of Doritos, at which point he removed a small black object from inside before giving her the bag back. The officer confiscated the object and, upon unrolling it, found several individually wrapped bags containing various illegal substances. In all, authorities recovered 28.5 grams of methamphetamine, 11.4 grams of marijuana, 40 Xanax pills, 1.7 grams of ecstasy, and 1.1 grams of heroin from the bundle. Griffin admitted to picking the illicit package up from an unknown individual hours before her visit, but she claimed to be under the belief that it was a cell phone rather than drugs. Nevertheless, she was charged with taking contraband into a penal facility. The grandmother spent 3 days in jail before being released, but her charges carry a maximum sentence of 6 years in prison if convicted. Number 3. Helen Marie Sanders. 2 students from Texas High School in Texarkana, Texas, got into a heated argument and eventually came to blows on January the 31st of 2023, leading to them both getting suspended. The teens subsequently brought their dispute off campus, and on February the 1st, the situation reached an escalation point. One of the students was driven to the other's house by his grandmother, at which point they were met by the rival teen and his grandmother, 71-year-old Helen Marie Sanders. At one point during the ensuing confrontation, Sanders allegedly went inside to retrieve a firearm for her grandson. She handed the weapon, a 9mm pistol, to the teen, who threatened the other party and fired a shot in their direction as they retreated in their vehicle. In the aftermath, both Sanders and her grandson were arrested and charged with deadly conduct. The teen was taken to a juvenile detention facility while his grandmother spent some time at the Bi-State Justice Center in Texarkana before being released on a $7,500 bond. The other student and his grandmother weren't criminally charged in connection with the incident. Today's topic was requested by Chayar and Roxy Lover. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Patricia Ebel. After a day at the pool in April of 2015, Florida woman Patricia Ebel got behind the wheel of her BMW and made her way back home with her 10-year-old grandson in the backseat. At some point during the drive, 49-year-old Ebel violently rear-ended a vehicle that was stopped at the intersection of Golden Gate Parkway and Livingston Road in Naples. Fortunately, all parties involved came away with minimal injuries. Responding deputies from the Collier County Sheriff's Office immediately noted that the woman, who was still wearing only a bikini from the pool, appeared to be intoxicated. She was administered a field sobriety test, which resulted in the bizarre image captured by a local news crew of the scantily clad grandmother performing the examination in the middle of the street. Ebel failed the test and smelled quite strongly of alcohol, so the officers decided to place her under arrest on suspicion of DUI. Her blood alcohol level was later determined to have been twice the legal driving limit. Ebel made headlines again the following January when she failed a sobriety test administered by her probation officer. The terms of her probation, which was implemented following the first arrest, stipulated that she needed to abstain from alcohol for a year. After her violation, she was taken back into the custody of Collier County authorities. If you're still longing for more after number 1, then we'll have our previous release on when grandsons go wrong lined up for you next. Number 1. Jerry Diana Tata. On October the 5th of 2020, Arkansas woman Jerry Diana Tata got in contact with a man who used to work as a security guard at a club where her daughter was a bartender. The two arranged to meet at a Chili's in Little Rock, where Tata informed him that her daughter was embroiled in a bitter custody battle with her ex-husband. The 69-year-old woman explained that her former son-in-law had allegedly been abusive towards both her daughter and their child. She then asked the former security guard to take care of the ex-husband or find someone who can. About a week later, the man asked Tata if he could give her number to an acquaintance that might be able to help her. Tata met with a prospective hitman on October the 20th. She implied that she wanted her former son-in-law to suffer an accident, while also indicated she'd already been in contact with a different hitman who'd backed out. Tata claimed to be unafraid of the potential for prison time and also clarified that her daughter was totally unaware of the murder plot she was orchestrating. She went on to offer the individual $1,500 to carry out the deed, but he demanded $2,000 so that he could purchase a clean gun. The following day, Tata gave the assassin her ex-son-in-law's address, but instead of receiving word of the job's completion, she got a visit from the police. As it turned out, the former security guard Tata approached about the murder-for-hire plot had become an FBI agent. In the years since they'd originally met, after she came to him with her request, he took it to his colleagues, leading to the sting operation that resulted in her arrest. Tata consequently faced a charge of interstate commerce facilities in the commission of murder for hire, but as of the most recent updates, the case was still ongoing. Number 7. William Strickland. On March the 2nd of 2013, 72-year-old William Strickland walked out of his home in the 400 block of East 95th Street in Chicago, Illinois, in order to catch a bus that would take him to his weekly dialysis appointment. However, after exiting his far south side residence, Strickland was reportedly shot in the back 6 times and died instantly. In the incident's aftermath, Cook County investigators uncovered that the senior citizen had actually been gunned down by his grandson, also named William. The 23-year-old hadn't acted alone, however, having allegedly been persuaded to commit the murder by his grandmother, Janet Strickland, the victim's wife of 30 years. It was subsequently reported that Janet, aged 67, had devised a plan to have her husband killed so that she could freely spend his money. William's defense team later claimed that the woman had initially solicited a man identified only as Black to carry out the shooting. After Black backed out, however, Janet called upon her grandson to perform the murderous deed himself. In February of 2016, William was convicted of the murder and consequently sentenced to 40 years in prison. Janet also faced numerous criminal charges in connection to her husband's slaying, and in August of 2016, she was sentenced to 18 years behind bars by a Cook County Circuit Court judge. Number 6. Clayton Hobby. On May the 16th of 2022, the police in East Hampton, Connecticut, revealed that a local man and his grandson had been caught running an illegal ghost gun operation out of their backyard. The term ghost gun refers to untraceable firearms produced with at-home kits in order to evade government detection and regulation. The suspects, identified as 64-year-old Kerry Shunk and Clayton Hobby, aged 18, had allegedly been manufacturing and selling unserialized AR-15 rifles, as well as various other firearms for an undisclosed period of time. The illicit backyard operation was ultimately foiled by a concerned neighbor who alerted the authorities to the unsavory activities of the teen and his grandfather. The police reportedly seized multiple ghost gun AR-15s in different stages of assembly, including one that had been converted to fire fully automatic. Shunk and Hobby were also found to be in possession of 3 ghost gun polymer handguns, 15 high-capacity magazines, and roughly 1,000 rounds of ammunition. Hobby, who was said to have been the mastermind behind the operation, faced 23 counts of gun-making and weapons possession charges and was held on a $250,000 bond. His grandfather faced 22 criminal counts and was held on a $100,000 bond. In the wake of their arrests, Shunk told the police that he didn't believe his grandson had evil intentions, but that he'd simply built his arsenal to protect his family. Number 5. Elijah Marrow. In the afternoon of June the 26th of 2014, Georgia police were called to the Marietta residence of 19-year-old Elijah Marrow after receiving reports of a shooting on the premises. Upon their arrival, officers discovered that Marrow's roommate, Darius Johnson, had suffered a critical gunshot wound before falling unconscious. The victim, who was also 19 at the time, was taken to a hospital where he later died from his injuries. According to the resulting police report, Marrow, the grandson of prominent rapper and actor Ice-T, had been recklessly handling a firearm, which was later revealed to have been stolen. The teen then inadvertently discharged the weapon, fatally wounding his unsuspecting roommate. Marrow was arrested in connection to the accidental shooting, for which he was charged with involuntary manslaughter, possession of a firearm in the commission of a felony, and reckless conduct. The young man also reportedly faced unrelated drug possession charges. The teenager was ultimately indicted by the Cobb County Grand Jury, and he was later imprisoned for 5 years. Following his release in 2019, Marrow kept a low public profile, and as of recent updates, has remained out of the headlines. Number 4. Nathan Billingsley. The lifeless body of 67-year-old Hazel Billingsley was found inside a metal shed in the backyard of her mobile home in Cypress, Texas, on March the 12th of 2017. After arriving at the scene, investigators reportedly came upon the victim's grandson, Nathan, hiding out in the woods near the residence with a firearm and his girlfriend. The 21-year-old allegedly admitted to shooting his grandmother but claimed the incident had been entirely accidental. The police immediately cast doubt as to the veracity of the young man's claims, however, as the evidence collected at the scene of the crime suggested that Hazel's killing had been purposeful and that there had been subsequent steps taken to clean up after the murder. The woman had reportedly sustained multiple fatal gunshot wounds, after which her body was wrapped in a blanket and stuffed inside the shed. Detectives spoke with Nathan's girlfriend, who claimed to have heard the gunshots while she was standing outside the home. She then rushed inside to find her boyfriend wrapping his grandmother's body in the blanket. Nathan allegedly threatened to kill her too before they fled into the woods on foot. The girlfriend wasn't ultimately charged in connection to the incident. Nathan, however, faced a charge of murder and was held in custody on a $200,000 bond, although the authorities didn't reveal what they believed to be the young man's motive for the shooting. Other members of the Billingsley family attributed his violent outburst to his past history of mental illness and drug abuse. Number 3. Brandon Gaspar. The police in Muncie, Indiana, were called to a house in the 2000 block of South Clark Street on January 30th of 2016 after receiving reports of a domestic disturbance. Upon their arrival, officers were met by 76-year-old Nancy Nicewonder, who denied that there had been any disturbance and indicated that all was well. Later that same day, however, Muncie police received a second distress call to the same address before reportedly encountering an injured young woman walking down South Clark Street. The officers subsequently learned that at the time of their initial visit to the home, the victim was being held inside against her will by her boyfriend, later determined to be 35-year-old Brandon Gaspar, Nicewonder's grandson. During the police's brief interaction with Nicewonder at the front door, Gaspar was allegedly holding his girlfriend in a headlock and had shoved a sock in her mouth to keep her from calling out to the officers. The victim reportedly received treatment for a dislocated shoulder at Indiana University's Health Ball Memorial Hospital. Both Gaspar and Nicewonder were taken into custody, with the former facing charges of domestic battery, aggravated battery, criminal confinement, and strangulation. The man's grandmother was accused of obstruction of justice, assisting a criminal, and interfering with the reporting of a crime. It subsequently emerged that Gaspar had an extensive criminal track record, with previous charges including domestic battery, theft, and possession of a controlled substance. Number 2. Lorenzo Moss. On the morning of February the 14th of 2022, emergency responders were dispatched to the scene of a house fire on Meadow Drive in Oakwood, Georgia. 68-year-old Andrew Donaldson was found dead inside the burning home, but investigators soon discovered that it hadn't been the blaze that had killed him. An autopsy conducted by the Hall County medical examiner determined that the victim's death had actually been caused by a gunshot wound suffered prior to the onset of the fire. Detectives thus concluded that the inferno had been started by Donaldson's killer in order to destroy evidence of the shooting. The ensuing homicide investigation eventually led the authorities in Georgia to identify 29-year-old Lorenzo Moss, a Wisconsin resident, as a suspect in the case. Moss, who was Donaldson's grandson, had recently traveled from his home in the Badger State down to Georgia, but his reasoning for the more than 1,000-mile journey wasn't clear. Investigators theorized that the young man had been involved in some sort of tension-fueled dispute with his grandfather, which had culminated with the fatal shooting and subsequent house fire. As of the case's latest updates, Moss had been located and arrested in Brown Deer, Wisconsin, on a charge of malice murder. He was held in custody without bond while awaiting his eventual extradition to Georgia. Number 1. Marcos Jarrell Martinez. On the evening of January the 28th of 2018, Arizona woman Vicky Tenhoven was found in critical condition on the kitchen floor of her Maricopa residence by her husband, who promptly contacted emergency services. Members of the Maricopa Fire and Medical Department arrived at the scene a short time later, and within 15 minutes of the initial 911 call, Tenhoven was pronounced dead. Following an autopsy by the Pinal County Medical Examiner, it was concluded that the 62-year-old woman had died of blunt force trauma to the head, as well as 5 stab wounds to her face and neck. The case was subsequently classified as a homicide, and investigators quickly identified the victim's grandson, Marcos Jarrell Martinez, as their prime suspect. During their sweep of the crime scene, the police had found blood spattered throughout various sections of the house, as well as numerous bloody knives with broken blades and handles. An official police report detailed how officers had also discovered a trail of blood that led from the kitchen to a bedroom. A subsequent DNA analysis of that blood suggested that it belonged to 23-year-old Martinez, who'd reportedly lived with his grandparents temporarily prior to the incident. Shortly after midnight on January the 30th, the police came upon Martinez inside his grandmother's vehicle, which had gone missing following her murder. The man was said to have sustained injuries consistent with the physical struggle Tenhoven was believed to have had with her attacker in the moments before her death. He was consequently taken into custody on charges of first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and unlawful use of means of transportation. Martinez, who was reported as having suffered serious mental health issues for much of his life, rejected a plea bargain from prosecutors, instead opting to take his case to trial, where he faced the overwhelming likelihood of spending the remainder of his life behind bars. Thanks for watching. If you could meet your grandmother at any age of her life, what would it be and why? Let us know in the comments section below.